On Wednesday, January 6th, I watched in horror as rioters forced their way into our Capitol building. I sat in front of the TV with headlines one might expect to find only in countries with unstable political leadership. A speech I had written months ago with observations of our current political climate and growing hate needed to suddenly be rewritten to reflect what I saw. Why has our political culture become so toxic? How is this normalizing? How is this becoming normal? I've been asking myself that for a long time. And it boils down to this. What is hate? How does it relate to politics? What are the effects? And mostly, why should we, as high schoolers, care? Hatred, anger, and frustration are on a steep upslope, as Democrats and Republicans find it increasingly difficult to get along and work towards the betterment of our country. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, there are now at least 940 organized hate groups in the U.S., groups that convene for the sole purpose of hatred. Not only that, but the number of likes and comments on hate group accounts on Twitter has skyrocketed by 900% in just the past 2 years. Okay, so what is hate? Where does hate come from, and why do we participate in it? In a way, today's political climate is not a result of hatred in general, but a result of a fear of the other, a natural and common human instinct. Behavioral researchers have found, time and time again, that we fear things that are different from us as a result of in-group, out-group theory. Hatred is driven by a love for the in-group and aggression towards the out-group. This feeling has accelerated as political leaders use more divisive rhetoric, choosing divisive issues for the purposes of their own agenda. The financial haves and have-nots growing apart just make this worse. And this is one of the few remaining points of agreement, that we are so attached to our own political ideas, so much so that the other group, those who don't agree with us, seem like an entirely different species. Concealed in this anger, however, is a fear of ourselves. We are afraid of the parts of ourselves we don't like. In the case of politics, the parts of our ideology we might question. Instead of the logical option to pick and choose different ideas from different ideologies, in the case of politics it's Democrat or Republican, we become so burdened in one of those lists that even the thought that your idea isn't the best only makes you believe it more. Clinical psychologist Dana Herron suggests in her work that we think about the outgroup as a movie screen on which to project unwanted parts of the self. As in, I'm not terrible, you are, you must be. Okay, so what does all this have to do with politics? This in-group, out-group psychology is the reason why no political candidate ever seems to answer the question up on that debate stage. When faced with what they've done wrong, instead of owning up and promising change, candidates repeatedly shift the conversation to what their opponent has done wrong. Because after all, it's always easier to blame others for our mistakes instead of doubting our own decisions. Political scientists have a name for this phenomenon: whataboutism. I first heard the term from comedian John Oliver many months ago, and now it's become an official word in numerous reputable dictionaries. It's defined as the technique of responding to a difficult question by raising a counteraccusation. Whataboutism is a scary thing because it indicates that the focus of politics has shifted from policy differences between candidates to hatred between groups. As a result, politics itself is shifting more from progressing our country to stagnation or even regression in far too many policy areas. What's even scarier is how blatant it's become. In 2017, after the deadly Charlottesville protests, President Trump did not strongly denounce the white supremacist groups as many expected, but within a sentence flipped the conversation on its head. He said, quote, "What about the alt-left that came charging it, as you said, the alt-right?" Word for word, he said almost the exact same thing in the first debate of this election cycle when asked to condemn white supremacy. And during the 2016 election, whataboutism was shocking to many Americans, maybe even to a point at which when we look back at it, we see that we are now numb to it, and that's not a good sign. Back in 2016, voters watched in awe as President Trump repeatedly turned direct questions of allegations of sexual assault, tax fraud, and other illegal activities to presidential candidate Clinton's email scandal. Quote, "What about all the Clinton ties to Russia, her big dollar speeches, etc.?" And Clinton often flipped the conversation right back. But now that sequence of events to us, it's no big deal. In a study of 11 countries, including the US, Turkey, Hungary, and others, psychologists found that when political leaders cast opponents as corrupt, they genuinely create these in-groups and out-groups. This leads to a sharpening rise in the if you win, I lose, and vice versa mentality, leading to this vicious cycle. Not only that, but supporters of the leader in power tolerate more illiberal and increasingly authoritarian behavior to keep their leader in power, while opponents of the person in power have to resort to undemocratic means to remove them from power. And this is how democracy starts to crumble. Similar research found that severe polarization is, unsurprisingly, stimulated by the rhetoric of political leaders exploiting the real grievances of voters, choosing divisive issues for the purposes of their own agenda. So by casting other groups as enemies, as them, political leaders can genuinely create these in-groups and out-groups. These political leaders can create fear. They can rally support behind themselves out of fear. President Trump, for example, focused his first campaign in early presidency on the, quote, criminal and rapist Mexican immigrants, terrorist Muslims, and other foreign enemies supposedly trying to tear America down. And whether or not you agree with that statement, just less than 8 months after the president took office, 75% of Republicans had negative views of Democrats, who happen to be more diverse and greatly value inclusivity. And 70% of Democrats reciprocated that feeling. In 2016, after the death of Supreme Court Justice Scalia, Democrats tried and failed to push a new nominee through Congress ahead of the 2016 election. Republicans proclaimed that the American people should decide who they want on the court as a result of that general election. And in 2020, that exact same situation arose, this time with Justice Ginsburg's seat. With a Republican president this time around, each side flipped to the opposite position they held in 2016. While the Constitution does not mention any change in procedure as a result of proximity to a general election, both sides are showing blatant hypocrisy. Politicians are making decisions and allegations based only on what benefits them. This goes to show that it's not the events that are causing allegations of wrongdoing anymore. It's the people. We are naturally defending our own group and attacking the other group, despite what actions are being taken, and politicians are playing on that more and more. Polarization did not begin with Trump. It has grown since the 1990s and accelerated under President Barack Obama, in large part because of residual racism in our country. By 2016, 45% of Republicans saw Democratic policies as a threat to them, and 41% of Democrats reciprocated that feeling. It was true a few years ago, and even more so now, that we feel distant from and suspicious of the other group and automatically trust our own group. This has started to crumble a key pillar in our democracy: accurate fact-telling, both in the media and directly from politicians. No longer are we just unsupportive of the other group, but we increasingly see them as un-American. To the political left, former President Trump and some of his supporters are un-American through xenophobia and racism that stands in the way of our American vision of tolerance as a nation built on immigrants. And to the political right, President Biden and some of his supporters are un-American through secularization and undermining our sovereignty by opening up borders unnecessarily. This bias, this seeing the other group as un-American, is catered by the media, exaggerated by media outlets, catered directly to viewers. Polarization has become so devastatingly extreme that supporters of each side are enraged by the other to a point of violence. We saw this in Charlottesville, we saw it in Pittsburgh, and most recently we saw it in Washington. Just this past month. To paraphrase the words of President Biden, the fortress of our democracy, which has stood strong for hundreds of years, was attacked. Thousands formed a pro-Trump mob, propelled by conspiracy theories, and laid siege to our nation's capital, the building at the center of our democracy. Not only did these events damage property and kill people on both sides of the police rioter line, but they represented the culmination of fake news and polarization. While these have not been the only examples of violence as a result of political divisiveness in recent years, they are the strongest. Our presidents, the highest official position in the most powerful nation in the world, have increasingly been approved by only one party. Those that didn't identify with our president's party used to at least be able to support their actions, ideas, and beliefs, We used to be able to stand behind our leader as a nation. This unity has plummeted. During Kennedy's presidency, 58% of Republicans supported the president, while more recently, during the first Bush administration, 51% of Democrats were in support. This slow decline in unity has plummeted in recent years, which is frightening and all too telling. During the Obama years, 23% of Republicans supported the president, while as of September, just 4% of Democrats supported President Trump. So what are the effects? Well, it turns out that turning Americans against each other politically has turned us against each other socially. Estimates from a 2017 survey found that American families, politically divided American families, lost 62 million person hours in Thanksgiving time with their families. Quote, in the wake of last year's bitterly contested presidential election, politically divided families cut their Thanksgiving celebration short by 30 to 50 minutes. Why did they do this? We are so enraged by the other side at this point that we hate the people we're supposed to love because politics has made us this way. Just knowing that someone doesn't believe in what you believe in can immediately take away the stability of a conversation or relationship, and that shift is being normalized. Our political culture is now based on division instead of solutions, which is tearing us apart. In 1960, 5% of Republicans and 4% of Democrats reported they would be disappointed in their child if their child married somebody identifying with the other party. In 2010, and projections show that this difference has heightened since 2010, 49% of Republicans, just about half of Republicans, and 33% of Democrats reported that they would be disappointed in their child. This is the cherry on top of a disastrous Sunday. Who we vote for and what ideas we like are tearing American families apart. We can't have democracy without partisanship. Using groups to separate competing interests makes the political process more personal to people. It allows people to identify with politics. But when partisanship overwhelms everything, democracy struggles to function, and this is the ultimate paradox in the conversation of political divisiveness. It's now impacting how we introduce people into democratic participation. The increased political divide, especially in the past few elections, has been pushing away teens from political involvement, both directly and indirectly. A survey found that 80% of teenagers report politics causes them stress, or that they see it as stressful. And 38% reported that politics has damaged close relationships. And so when the youth of our democracy is pushed away from involvement, we know that our democracy is sick and has a grim future if we don't do something. Those that do decide to participate politically often do so in an unhealthy way, largely by spreading or receiving fake news. The increasing hateful rhetoric of each side towards the other, especially in each side's view of the other as un-American, has taken its toll on the truth. Social media is currently endangering the integrity of our democracy through misleading or wrong information that, thanks to the internet, can now be written, shared, or posted by anyone. As we grow more reliant on social media instead of the news, we are choosing loyalty to a leader and belief in what they say over doing research ourselves. And it's not our fault. Partisanship and fake news is making reality very difficult to find, and it's driving us in a dangerous direction. The amount of effort it takes to be fully informed in today's world is unrealistic. When fake news successfully leads some people to take action on the basis of something fabricated or completely made up, political involvement is dirty and takes us backwards instead of forwards. A common misconception about fake news is that it comes from only foreign accounts. And in school we learn that we should be able to identify it when we come across it. What most don't know is that much of the fake news that is spread today is done so unknowingly by average Americans just passing along information that seems true to them. A study conducted in March of 2019 by Statista found that 10% of adults have shared news they knew at the time to be made up online. But a whopping 49%, just about half of American adults, have shared news online they later found to be made up. And later just doesn't cut it. Americans from around the country, especially teenagers deciding whether to be politically involved over the course of their lives, are on social media daily. They're exposed to these increasingly extreme and hateful headlines that just aren't true but seem like they are. In his farewell address, President Obama warned of the dangers of growing partisanship, saying, quote, "We allow our political dialogue to become so corrosive that people of good character are turned off from public service. So coarse with rancor that Americans with whom we disagree are not just misguided, but are somehow malevolent. As a teenager, I've seen firsthand how people, young people, can grow strong feelings of hatred towards each other because of what they say and believe, even before they have a fully developed brain. So that all seems like a lot to take in. Why should you care? Well, as a new generation of voters, we need to be able to ignore the hatred and look at the facts. Today, people are taking extreme and often fake ideas and acting irrationally as a result. On a less statistical note, trends on TikTok illustrate this point in a way that has caused many like myself to become frustrated with our generation. Constant political division dominates my feed, such as this trend which grew prior to the 2020 election, in which TikTok proposed in an attempt to show that supporters of one party are more or less physically attractive than supporters of the other. One audio says, quote, "I've never seen a pretty Trump supporter, and if you're offended, you should be." Disregarding my own political beliefs, it's frankly disgusting that attacks have become so personal, even in the teenage community, that we degrade each other on social media for the purposes of making our own views seem better. And worse, it's happening because of our parents and political leaders mindlessly separated in a harshly divided group. Putting aside your own beliefs, it's not difficult to realize that political toxicity is seeping into our lives in a negative way. For teens, especially soon-to-be first-time voters, the political realm is tearing apart their view of the world into two distinct sides with seemingly no room in between. And as a new political generation arises, it is of the utmost importance that we discourage this behavior. So yes, I am just a high school student. I'm not even of voting age. But I've worked hard to create a mindset in which I can look at politics logically. And logic dictates that hating somebody because of which bubble they feel in on a piece of paper is outrageous. The only way to fix this troubling rising hatred is to ignore the calls of our political leaders and look at the facts. It's time to realize that the in-group and out-group aren't different species, and to treat each other with decency. Our generation needs to be the one to save democracy. Because if we don't do something, there's no light at the end of this tunnel. So what can you do as a soon-to-be first-time voter? Listen. Listen to everyone, not just your family or your favorite news source. If you aren't yet interested in politics, that's all the better. Introduce yourself by listening to all viewpoints. Because we need to start seeking to understand before being understood. If we only listen to people and headlines that tell us our views are right all the time, we're limiting ourselves and we're hurting our country. So instead, believe what you truly think is right. Believe what you believe, not what people want you to believe, because independent thought is something we'll always need more of. Thank you.